The old lighthouse had been decommissioned for 23 years when it rang its fog bell for a ship that no longer existed. No one was supposed to be there. The lamp had been removed. The keeper's quarters were empty. The windows were boarded. And the iron stairs had rusted enough that people from the county posted warning signs telling curious teenagers, amateur ghost hunters, and people with poor survival instincts to stay out. But at 2:17 on a Thursday morning, when the fog rolled in thick enough to erase the cliffs from the coast road, the bell began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times, slow and heavy over the black water, and out beyond the rocks, where no vessel should have been able to pass safely, the ship answered. Not with a modern horn, not with radio, with a long, slow, mournful steam whistle from another century. By morning, the fog had lifted. The sea was empty, and the lighthouse stood silent above the cliffs, as if it had never made a sound at all. Welcome back to Tavern Reflections. Pull up a chair, pour yourself something warm, and settle in beside the fire for tonight's reflection. Tonight's story takes us to a lonely stretch of coast where the sea keeps old names. The fog hides more than distance, and one forgotten lighthouse may remember every ship that ever passed beneath its beam through its light. Jack Tucker once claimed that the sea never forgets a name once it has spoken it aloud. That sounds poetic, dreamy, until something out in the dark answers back. If you enjoy strange stories, eerie reflections, forgotten places, and dark wanderings along the edges of reality, more strange doors await at TravisSivart.com. Last name, same as the first, but in reverse. Now then, let's follow the light as I read you a story out of the dark. A lighthouse stood on Bellwether Point in Virginia, a jagged hook of stone where the coastline bent sharply into the Atlantic, and the sea punished anything careless enough to come too close. For nearly 140 years, it had warned ships away from the reef below. Fishermen knew it, freighters knew it, sailors spoke of it in a way people speak of old doctors, stern school teachers, bitter grandmothers, who somehow keep everyone alive through sheer refusal to tolerate stupidity. You know, what we all eventually hope to become one of. The Bellwether Light was not beautiful. Some lighthouses are. Oh my God, they're pretty. Tall white towers rising elegantly from green cliffs. People go there to take pictures, paint them, just see them. They're romantic, they're photogenic. The sort of place where couples take engagement photos and pretend seagulls are not actively plotting crimes. Bellwether was different. It was shorter than most, squat, weather-beaten, hadn't been painted recently, and it was built from gray stone, darkened by generations of salt, smoke, rain, and winters. It looked less like a lighthouse than a clenched fist raised against the sea And for a very long time, that fist had done its job. Then the coastline modernized. Ships changed. Navigation systems improved. And satellites took over what Flame and Lens had once provided. The Coast Guard decommissioned the light. The lamp was removed. Keeper's house was shuttered. The trail up from the road became overgrown. And eventually, Bellwater Point became the kind of place locals mentioned only when warning outsiders not to wander near the cliffs after dark. Samuel Roke ignored those warnings, mostly because he had been the last lighthouse keeper there. Samuel was 76 years old when the bell rang again. He lived alone in a small house half a mile inland, close enough to smell the sea and far enough to pretend he had left the place behind. His wife, Elian, what a great name, right? Well, sadly, she'd been dead. About 8 years at that point. His daughter lived in Oregon, across the country. His knees objected to stairs, his hands shook slightly when pouring coffee, but every Sunday morning, rain or shine, he walked up to the lighthouse, his lighthouse. And it wasn't because anyone paid him, not because it needed him. It was because old duties they don't always end when the paperwork says they do. When the last time the boss looks at you and hands you a check. They don't even do that anymore, do they? But anyhow, he checked the door, cleared the weeds away from the steps, chased away gull nests, scraped salt from the windows that nobody looked through anymore, and told himself it was habit. But habit, it's often grief wearing work clothes. The first time the bell rang again, Samuel was asleep. At least he thought he was. The sound entered his dream first, deep, metallic, slow. A bell heard through a fog, maybe literal and metaphorical. He opened his eyes in darkness, his bedroom window trembling faintly in the wind. For several seconds he lay still, listening. Then it came again. Boom. Far off, but unmistakable. Samuel sat upright. No, he whispered. A sensible man would have called someone. A younger man would have driven. A foolish man would have gone immediately into the fog. Now, Samuel Roke had been all three at different points in his life. So he put on boots, coat, and cap, took a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and stepped into the night. On the bright side, pun intended, it was a good flashlight. Nice, heavy material, not a cheap plastic thing. The fog was thick enough to make the road vanish 10 feet ahead. And the air, oh man. It was one of those smells that you knew, but you knew it with your heart or your head, and rarely both. It smelled of salt and cold stone. Wind pushed through the grass and long, shuddering waves. Above the sound of the sea, the bell rang again. Bong. Bellwether's fog bell hadn't worked in 23 years. Samuel knew this because he'd helped disconnect it. Yet the sound continued as he climbed the path toward the point. Sea grasses and sand on his left and right. Wooden planks half buried under shifting sand dunes. And by the time he reached the lighthouse, his chest hurt and his breath came hard. The tower was dark. No lamp, no glow, no movement. But the bell in the old housing above the service shed, it swung once, slowly, under its own impossible strength. Bong. Samuel lowered the flashlight. Out at sea, something answered. A steam whistle, long, low, mournful. Sound rolled through the fog and across the dunes, catching in the grass like an animal calling for its mate. Samuel, he turned towards the water. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape emerged. A ship. Not clearly. He couldn't completely see it. It wasn't fully visible. Just enough of a silhouette to freeze his blood. A high bow, a tall funnel, masts, dark windows. It was a vessel from another age sliding slowly through the fog toward the reef. Now, Samuel knew ships the way some people know birds. He'd watched them for half his life. This one did not belong now. It did not belong in the present. Samuel stumbled toward the tower door, like my words as I read this story. But the door was shut and locked, and the lock was rusted. But his old key did still fit. After a little persuasion and a few words, unsuitable for public worship. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of mildew, salt, cold iron. He climbed the spiral stairs one agonizing step at a time. If you've ever had knee problems, you know what I'm talking about here. Clutching the rail, almost pulling yourself along as much as you're stepping up. At the top, the lantern room stood empty. The great Fresnel lens was gone, as was its glory days. The lamp was gone. Only the circular platform remained beneath cracked glass windows. Little walk around in a teeny land that had been forgotten. But as Samuel entered, light flooded the room. Not electric, not even flame. White gold and impossibly bright. It poured from empty air where the old lamp had once stood. It was caught by a lens that was no longer there, and it swept across the fog in one slow, deliberate arc. The beam struck the water. The ship's whistle cried again. Then the silhouette shifted away from the rocks, turned seaward, and vanished. The light died, the bell stopped, and Samuel stood alone at the top of a dead, short, squat, ugly lighthouse. And he was shaking so badly he had to sit on the floor, and there he stayed until dawn. And the sun rose. And that morning he did what frightened old men with practical minds and decades upon decades of experience do. He made coffee. Then he went to the library. Bellwether had kept records longer than most people keep grudges. Ship logs, weather reports, wreck accounts, maintenance books, old newspaper clippings stored in folders by people who believe the past should be filed properly and then promptly forget to ever look at it again. Like your grandmother's photo albums, just pulled out on rare occasions when there's something important enough that you have to share that memory so somebody else might have a chance to hold on to it for some vague purpose only they can clarify. Samuel searched through brittle pages until he found the ship. It was called the Maribel Green. It was a steam cargo vessel lost in the fog near Beltweather Point in 1911. Officially, she had struck the reef before dawn and broken apart. 22 men died. 3 survived. But Samuel, he remembered what he had seen. The ship hadn't struck the reef. Not last night. It had turned away. Memory, then. That was the word he settled on because it sounded less insane than ghost. The lighthouse had remembered the Maribel Green. And somehow, in remembering, it had saved her. Not in history. History remained unchanged. A cold, cold mistress, set in her ways, and only changed by the opinion of old men who pushed it upon her. A newspaper still reported wreckage. The names remained listed among the dead. But something for Samuel had happened in the fog. Excuse me. Perhaps for more than Samuel. Something unfinished had replayed. And the lighthouse had done what it had been built to do. It guided a ship away from the rocks. After that, Samuel tried very hard to ignore Bellwether Point. Not his job, not his circus, not his monkeys. But he failed. The second ship came in 9 nights later. He was awake this time, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea. The notebook open before him. Fog again. It had rolled in just after midnight. The bell rang at 1:04 a.m. Samuel didn't hesitate like he'd been expecting this. He climbed the hill in a rain so fine it felt like cold dust on his face. You know, the kind that barely makes you feel like you're getting wet. But you're cold enough to shiver when you get out of it. The lighthouse door stood open when he arrived. Inside, the spiral stairs waited in darkness. And the flashlight came out again. At the top, the invisible lamp burned again. This time, the ship beyond the fog was smaller, a fishing schooner, 2 masts, torn sail, listing badly. Samuel watched a beam sweep across her bow. For one moment, he saw figures on deck. Men in oilskins. You know, the kind they just don't wear nowadays? One waving his cap, one clutching the rail, one looking directly toward the light with an expression of not fear, but recognition. Then the schooner turned. The fog swallowed her. The light went out. In the morning, Samuel went back to the library and found her in the logs. The Annabelle. 2 words. Annabelle. The Annabelle. Missing during a March gale in 1934. All hands lost. The lighthouse remembered her too. After that, the visits became more frequent. Only on foggy nights, only when the sea was rough, and only when conditions resembled the nights those ships had passed Bellwether Point long ago. Steamers, fishing boats, patrol craft, freighters. One sleek white passenger vessel that glided through mist with all her deck lights blazing, music faintly drifting across the water, as if somewhere aboard people were still dancing to a live band. Strings. A straining trumpet in the night. Samuel began keeping his own log. Date, time, weather, vessel description, sound heard, direction taken. Whenever possible, he matched each ship to historical records. Most had survived their original passage. Some had not. That troubled him. At first, he believed the lighthouse remembered only wrecks, but no, it remembered everything. Not merely disasters. Every vessel that had ever passed beneath its beam, through its light. Each ship that had trusted its light. Every horn answered by bell. A nautical conversation that doesn't happen the way they used to anymore. Every captain who corrected course, every deckhand who looked up through the storm and fog and thought, there it is, safe now. The lighthouse remembered them all. Memory is just another form of navigation, folks. Samuel didn't know where he had heard that phrase. Maybe from a book, maybe from a dream, maybe from the lighthouse itself. But he wrote it at the top of one notebook page and underlined it twice. By winter, Samuel had stopped pretending he was investigating. He was listening. That was different. Investigation assumes something can be solved. Listening understands some things can only be received. Bellwether did not behave like a haunted place. Not exactly. There were no chains dragged across floors, no pale faces at windows, no spectral children asking where their mother had gone. The lighthouse was not haunted by people. It was haunted by purpose. And that felt older, stranger, wizened. Buildings built for one job sometimes retain the shape of that job long after humans, or whoever's out there, abandon them. A church without a congregation still feels like a prayer. A schoolhouse without children still feels like waiting. A hospital or sanitarium without patients still feels like suffering, with nowhere to go. And a lighthouse without ships? Well, perhaps that's a kind of grief. Samuel understood that grief too well. When Elian died, everyone told him, relax, rest, take it easy, as though rest could replace usefulness. As though a man who'd spent his life watching horizons could simply turn inward, become quieter, like furniture that no one uses anymore, has no need for anymore. The world had no use for him anymore. Not really. People were polite. His daughter called, neighbors waved, the pharmacist asked how he was doing, and the voice people reserve for old men and wet dogs. But usefulness, that had gone out of him. The lighthouse, it understood. Or at least Samuel believed it did. One night when he sat on the lantern room floor wrapped in an old coat, the bell rang without fog. It surprised him that it never happened before. The sky was clear, moonlight silvered the sea, that blazing path waving down the middle. Stars burned cold and bright above the water and also murkily danced in the waves. Samuel stood slowly, one hand gripping something to help him up, the other hand on his knee to help push him up. And the lamp flickered into existence. It was weaker than usual, pulsing like a tired heart. Out on the horizon appeared not one ship, but dozens, no, hundreds. Ships of every age, sailing vessels with canvas full of moonlight, steamships trailing black smoke, fishing trawlers, Coast Guard cutters, warships, pleasure boats, freighters, all moving silently across the moonlit sea. Procession. A memory fleet. Samuel pressed one hand against the glass. The ships didn't approach the rocks. They simply passed beyond the light, one by one. As each entered the beam in turn, that ship became briefly sharp and real. Names appeared on bows. Voices rose faintly. Bells, engines, crewing call, children laughing, music, prayer. Like memories passing through your mind's eye. Then, each passed back into the darkness. The lighthouse, Samuel decided, wasn't remembering one ship that night. It was dreaming. Samuel lowered himself back down and wept. Not from fear, because of the scape and scope. A person forgets how many lives pass through the reach of ordinary duty. We all influence, affect, touch so many people. So did this lighthouse. One light had touched all those vessels. One tower had stood witness, seeing them, acknowledging them. One keeper after another had climbed those stairs. Trimmed lamps, polished glass, logged weather, and kept watch. Most names are gone now. Most stories lost. But not entirely. Bits remained. They weren't lost, not totally. Not here, not to Bellwether. Then Samuel saw one ship that made him stop breathing. A small blue trawler. The Ellen May. His father's boat. Samuel had been 11 when it sank in a storm south of the point. His father had called him Sammy. Just a fleeting moment of memory there. His father's body had never been recovered. The official report said the boat had gone down before reaching Bellwether's beam. But there it was, moving slowly across the moonlit water. Samuel whispered, "Dad?" The trawler turned just slightly, a man standing at the rail, too far away to see clearly. Yet Samuel knew him immediately, not by face, by posture, by body language, by movement, by the way grief preserves the silhouette of our memories of the people we love. When the faces have long disappeared, we still remember how they moved. This is what we see in a crowd when somebody we miss too often seems to be there for a moment. The man raised one hand, and Samuel raised his. The beam of the lighthouse swept between them, and the trawler vanished. After that night, Samuel stopped sleeping much. He ate less, walked slower, spent more hours at the lighthouse than at his home. The locals noticed, because locals notice everything while pretending not to. Mrs. Ketter from the post office told him he looked thin. The grocer asked whether he needed help with anything. His daughter called and said he sounded far away. Samuel almost told her. He almost said, "The lighthouse is remembering the dead, and your grandfather waved to me from the moonlit sea." His daughter was well past her 50th birthday also. And that would have been, well, instead he just said, "I'm just tired." This was not entirely untrue. The missing entry appeared in February. Samuel had been reviewing old logs from the winter of 1898 when he found a gap. 4 pages. Torn out. Not missing accidentally, removed. Carefully. So they didn't really show, just sliced out. The dates covered one of the most, in recorded history and local memory, one of the worst storms, or the most destructive storms. 3 vessels were known to have passed near Bellwether that week. 2 were recorded elsewhere. 1 had never been found. The Mercy Reed. Passenger packet. 41 souls aboard. Disappeared during the storm. No wreckage, no bodies, no confirmed sighting after leaving harbor. Yet Bellwether's logbook had been cut precisely where her passage should have been recorded. Samuel searched newspapers, county archives, private collections. He found rumors. A keeper dismissed weeks later. Families demanding answers. Reports of the lighthouse lamp failing during the storm. One article hinted the keeper had abandoned his post. Another said the lamp burned all night. No one agreed. The sea had taken the ship. The lighthouse had failed to remember. Or someone had tried to make it forget. After that, the bell began ringing at odd hours. Not full tolls, small movements, restless, as though the lighthouse itself had become aware of the missing pages. Samuel dreamed of tearing paper, of water pouring downstairs, of a woman knocking from inside the lantern room glass. Then came the storm. It arrived on a Sunday evening in March, walking across the ocean like an army. Just that steady line coming forward. It's always beautiful to watch. By sunset, the sky had turned green-black. From those really bad storms. Just changes the sound and the sight of the air itself. By 9, rain hammered the windows of Samuel's house hard enough to rattle dishes in the cupboards. Gotta love a good storm. By 10, the power failed. At 11:43, the fog bell rang. It wasn't slowly this time. It was urgently. Bong, bong, bong. Samuel was already dressed. He took his coat, flashlight, and the old brass key, walked to the bellwether. Nearly killed him that time. Wind shoved him sideways. Rain spiked at his eyes, nearly blinding him. Twice he fell in the mud. Not a good thing at his age. Once he nearly turned back. Then the bell rang again, furious over the storm. And Samuel heard another sound beneath it. A woman screaming. He climbed. By the time he reached the lighthouse, the tower was alive. Not metaphorically. Alive. The stone vibrated under his hand. The railing was warm to the touch. The pulse under his feet was regular. The bell swung violently in the gale. The windows blazed with impossible light. Inside, the iron stairs groaned as though remembering every boot that had ever climbed them. Samuel ascended slowly, painfully. When you got the rain and the storms, the joints that bother you, they get a mind of their own at that point. But the air grew warmer with each step. At the top, the lantern room burned brighter than Samuel had ever seen it. The lost lens had returned. The great glass apparatus towered in the center of the room, radiant and spinning, fracturing light into gold, white, and blue. Outside, through rain and fog, the sea boiled, and there, impossibly close to the reef, was the Mercy Reed. She was beautiful, even if you're not a fan of seagoing ships. 3-mast, dark hull, lanterns swaying along her deck like a magical fairy dance. Passengers crowded at the rail in stormlight, some screaming, some praying, some staring toward the lighthouse and Samuel with desperate hope. Samuel looked at the large lamp in the center of the room, and the beam faltered, skipped, then it dimmed, and suddenly he understood. The lighthouse hadn't forgotten the ship. It had been unable to finish remembering her. Something had broken that night in 1898. A lamp failure, a human failure, a moment of absence. Everybody's got to use the bathroom sometime. A duty left undone. I said duty. The memory had been trapped there. It had trapped itself there, repeating storm, repeating terror, repeating the almost. Samuel moved to the control wheel. There should have been no working mechanism left to control. The iron, it was warm, almost hot to his touch, feverish. He turned it with everything he had, and the lens resisted. The tower groaned. Below, the bell rang wildly. "Come on," Samuel whispered. The beam shifted slowly, too slowly. The Mercy Reed drifted closer to the reef. Samuel heard the rocks beneath the waves like teeth waiting under black water, grinding, gnashing, hungry. He turned harder. Pain exploded through his chest on the left, shooting into his bicep, tripping over his shoulder bone where it connects. He ignored it, and the beam aligned. For one perfect moment, bellwether light struck the ship full across her bow. The Mercy Reed answered with a whistle, so loud it shook the glass of the lighthouse. On the deck, the passengers turned. The captain spun the wheel. The ship corrected course. 1 degree, 2. Enough. The reef vanished beneath her stern, and she passed into open water. Then the storm changed. Not stopped. It changed. The wind softened. The screaming faded. Rain became mist. Passengers on the Mercy Reed stood silently along the rails, facing the lighthouse. Little girl in a bright dress, probably her best dress, lifted one hand. Samuel lifted his. Barely a wave, more of a answering call of somebody who sees you from a distance, though they don't know you. Then ship, storm, bell, lens, and light. It all dissolved into darkness. Samuel woke at dawn on the lantern room floor. The lamp was gone again. The lens was gone. The tower, cold. Outside, the sea lay calm, flat, beneath the pale gray morning sky. Samuel descended slowly, because sometimes going down the stairs is harder than going up them, often. At the base of the stairs, something waited on the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. Dry, yellowed, written in the hand of a keeper dead for more than a century. Samuel took him home. He didn't show anyone. He didn't call the Historical Society. He didn't send him to scholars who would argue over ink, paper, and providence until all wonder had been strangled into footnotes. He read them once. Only once. The keeper's account was simple. The lamp had failed during the storm. He tried to repair it. Too late. The Mercy Reed had struck the reef. But the final line was different. Written in a shaking hand, it said, "The light owes them passage still." Samuel placed the pages inside the old bellwether logbook and returned it to the library anonymously. After that, the lighthouse never rang again. Not once. Fog came and went, storms battered the point, and waves broke against the reef. But Bellwether remained silent. No bell, no light, no horns from vanished ships, no memory fleet beneath the moon. Only stone, rust, wind, and sea. People said the old structure finally died. Samuel thought otherwise. He believed it had finished. And there is a difference. The reason lighthouse stories linger so deeply in the human imagination is because a lighthouse has one purpose: to help someone find their way home. That's all. No conquest, ambition, no performance, just a light held against darkness, a warning, a promise. A human made star saying, "Not here, not these rocks. Turn away. Keep going. You can do this. Survive another day. I got you." Perhaps that's why abandoned lighthouses feel so melancholy. They're buildings built entirely around care, lonely care, perhaps, stern care. The kind that doesn't hug you, doesn't flatter you, doesn't ask how your day was. It simply stands in weather and refuses to let you die if it can help it. When that purpose ends, the structure still carries the shape of it. And maybe places remember us because they have nothing else to do with all the years we leave behind. We like to think memory belongs only to minds. But anyone who's walked into an old house after years away knows that's not entirely true. If you've ever gone to an estate sale, a historical site, you you can feel the weight, the wisdom, the stories. They're there. They're just not clear anymore. They're covered with the dust of time and history. But rooms remember. Staircases remember. Kitchens remember voices. Church pews remember grief. Workshop benches remember hands and projects. And maybe lighthouses remember ships. Not literally, probably not, but emotionally. The idea feels almost true enough to get you choked up a little, to hurt a little. Because all of us, in some way, want to be remembered by the places that saw us pass through. We want our journey, our crossings to matter. We want someone or something to know we were here, even if only for a moment, even if only as a name spoken into the fog. And perhaps the deepest wish hidden inside this story is that the dead. You know what? No, it's not that the dead return. It's that nothing truly faithful ever forgets its purpose. Nothing truly faithful ever forgets its purpose. Not even stone, not even light. Not even an old, short, squat, ugly tower standing alone above a hungry sea. Thank you for spending part of your evening here in the tavern. If you enjoy strange stories, eerie reflections, forgotten places, and darker wanderings through the edges of reality, more strange doors await at TravisSivart.com. Last name, same as the first, but in reverse. Jack Tucker would probably say every light eventually becomes a memory, and every memory becomes a shore someone's still trying to reach. He may be right. But until next time, mind the shadows. And remember that some places spend their whole lives helping others find their way home.